Hi, I'm Fiona, the Depression Muse. I'm on a mission to reduce the global suicide rate to zero, and I'm doing that one Depression Muse at a time. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that later on. But I've come on today because I just want to have a wee chat about this whole concept of recovery and why it's bullshit. Because it is bullshit. Okay? When you live with depression, the idea of recovery, and I will add, I'm only specifically talking about depression here. I'm not talking about addiction. That's a whole other ball game. Right now I'm talking about depression, okay? And why I believe that recovery from depression is unrealistic, and I believe it's unachievable, and I believe it sets you up to fail before you even start. Now, I will also add, where I live is a wee village in New Zealand, and at the moment we've got a pretty good wind blowing. So it may be that I vanish, and that's because the internet is not as tough as our wind is. So I'll try and come back on, but once we're kicked off, that's kind of it for a good hour or so at least. So, getting back to the topic at hand. Oops, and there we go. See, we've got a dog that knocks over the stand. We've got another dog that barks. And this is the joy of the whole life thing, isn't it? Right, back to what I was talking about. Depression and recovery. So, when you think about the whole kind of concept, now when you think about a cold, for example, and this is one of the goals that I have, is to have a topic, is to get the topic of conversation, depression, to get depression as a topic of conversation as often as we talk about things like the common cold, okay? Because that's what it needs to be. When you look at the figures, there's more people in New Zealand, in the world really, that are getting depressed, that are getting clinical depressed. I don't mean miserable, because things are pretty shit all round right now, okay? I'm not belittling anybody that's miserable at the moment, because there's a bloody good reason for it. But I'm talking about clinical depression here, okay, which is a different thing. Now, take the common cold. When you have a cold, you know what's going to happen. You feel like shit, you feel it coming on, you get the sore throat and the sniffles, and you know it's coming on. Now, you know you're going to have 3 or 4 days. If you're anything like me, you're pretty sure you're going to get a sinus infection thrown in on top of it as well. But if we're just looking at the cold, you've got 3 or 4 days, you're going to feel like crap, your nose is going to run like nobody's business, blah, 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 and then you're going to get better, okay? And then you're going to go right back to how you were before you got the cold, okay? Now, if you have a look at the definition of recovery, which I did yesterday, definition of recovery is to restore health to a previous state. All right? When you recover from a cold, you do restore your health back to a previous state. Okay? When you have depression, and when you get better from an episode of depression, you don't go back to a previous state. You really don't. Because things have inherently changed within you. Okay? You can't go through an episode of depression and not be altered in some kind of way. Now, that means things like, I mean, I use myself as an example because, you know, I know myself the best. So, as an example for me, after the first bout of depression, I was constantly aware of the fact that I could get depressed again, okay? You know, I've now been managing this for about 40 odd years. So there's things that I do often, okay? So it's changed my mindset. It's changed my mindset. It's changed, my opinions on many things. And it's also changed me in a deeper level. I believe it's changed certain aspects of my personality, okay? Now, I also believe that it's changed certain chemicals in my brain. Now, I don't know the specifics of this because I am not a scientist by any fucking imagination. But what we do know is that there is a lack of, or the latest studies have said, let me put it that way, the latest studies have said that, most people with depression, or all people with depression, have a lack of serotonin. Okay, now serotonin is one of the chemicals in your brain that makes you feel good, in a nutshell. See my very scientific terms here? Now, that's significantly altered. Okay? It may return to the state it was before you had that episode of depression. I'd like to see somebody actually prove that to me, because I don't believe that that's true. But, if you know different and you can prove that to me, by all means let me know. Okay? But you definitely don't go back to the same state that you had before. Alright? So that's one of the reasons why I think that recovery from depression is bullshit. Because you can't go back to who you were before. You can't. Things have changed. You now know things that you didn't know before. Okay? You know how nuts your head can make you, which you didn't know that before. Okay, when you recover from a cold, you might get the sniffles again, but you're not spending all your time. It's not sitting in the back of your mind, worrying. It's not something sitting there that you're constantly thinking about. Okay? So, looking at it the other way, or not the other way, but another thing to consider is the definition of recovery that says it's an absence of symptoms. Now, I find this one really interesting. Absence of symptoms. Okay. One of the reasons that there's so much stigma and so much lack of understanding around depression is because many of us don't understand the difference between sad and clinically depressed. Okay? Because they're the same thing. Kind of. But not exactly. Easy to understand, isn't it? You can be sad and it not become depression. Okay? If you have depression, you're probably sad. And those are just the symptoms that I'm looking at here. There are other symptoms that go into it, but that's not what I'm on about today. All right? So my question is to define the absence of symptoms. Now, this is for people that have had an episode of depression, okay? So when you when you've already had an episode, it does add an extra element on it than if you're being diagnosed with your first episode. So, after you've recovered from your episode of depression, when you get sad again, are you depressed again? Because you were before. How does that work? How is that measured? Okay, so take that to its next level. How do we measure depression? We go by the DSM-5, I think we're up to now. Yes. Or we could be up to 5. Who knows? Anyway, it's at the minimum, it's the DSM-5. Now, the DSM-5 and any other diagnostic tool that you come across will tell you that to get a diagnosis of clinical depression, you need to have like 3 or 4, I don't know the exact details off the top of my head, so I'm not really making it up as I go along, but I'm being a bit vague about it. You can go and look this shit up, okay? You can look up the DSM-5 and see what's on Google. So it's, just say for example, it's 3 or 4 of the following, and you get a following list of things that they use to diagnose. So things like lack of enjoyment in life for a certain period of time, sleeping disruptions, appetite disruptions, blah, 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 blah. You know the symptoms. Okay. So to get the actual diagnosis, you have to have so many of those for such a length of time. Okay. So my question is, after you've had that episode of depression, do you need all those new symptoms all over again? Do you start from scratch? Or is there relapses? How does it work? The point I'm making here is that it's so fucking vague that it doesn't actually mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. If you have depression, and if you have ongoing, long-standing depression, you know when you're depressed and when you're managing. You know the difference, okay? And here's another wee sideline for you too, because it's something that annoys me to no end. It's like people that have schizophrenia, okay? So when they talk about people that have schizophrenia, they call them schizophrenics. Pisses me off no end. Because when they do that, they're labeling somebody. You are a schizophrenic. That's what you are. Well, actually, no. You are, in fact, a person who has a condition called schizophrenia. It's different. It's different. And it may sound like I'm nitpicking, but it's a big difference when you're living with it. Trust me. So, when you have a condition called depression, you know when you're in the middle of an episode. You can try your best to ignore it, but you know. You also know, and you also know you're not going to be able to ignore it for too long. That's just the nature of the beast. So you also know when you're not in the midst of an episode of depression, but you've still got the bastard. It's still sitting there, right in the back of your head, right in the back of your brain, or whichever part of the brain it is, lurking. Because we know for a fact that one episode of depression makes it easier for your brain to latch onto another episode of depression. And that episode makes it easier for the next episode. And on and on and on it goes. Okay? So you need to be aware. If you want to have any kind of continuity in your life, you need to be aware that you've had it once, good chance you'll get it again. There are people who don't. Those people are getting fewer and fewer, and I believe they will continue to get fewer and fewer. I just don't believe it works that way. So that brings me to the other aspect of this recovery bullshit that annoys me. They set you up to fail. They set you up to fail, okay? In the medical system, right? Treated for depression, so in you go. You meet all these wonderful medical health professionals who are going to do all these fabulous things for you, okay? I will add, I add this always, and I will add it again, there are some people within that system doing marvellous, marvellous jobs. There's also some people doing shit jobs. But all of those, both sets of those people are working with a system that is flawed beyond belief. And the problem with that system is, in my opinion, there's no room for individuality. This is the system you must follow because our textbook says this works and this is what you're going to do. Okay? All you've got to do then actually is Google the suicide rate and see that the system doesn't fucking work at all. Anyway, back to my point. They have this system and these things that you need to follow that are going to, the goal is to get to that recovery, that absence of symptoms. Okay, fine. So, here's your list of things to do. You get things like exercise daily. Go outside into the sunlight. Get your vitamin D. Socialise. They're all very big on socialising. You must go out and talk to people. Now, if you're a person who doesn't like going out and talking to people, why the fuck would you force yourself to do it? It's going to make you feel worse. That's all that's going to do. There are many, many people out there who are introverts, who are loners, who just, don't play well with others. They'd rather stay at home. They enjoy their own company. Forcing them to go out and join a group is not going to help them. In those cases, staying at home and isolating is not a symptom. That's who they are, and that's how they live their life, and why the hell shouldn't they? Okay? So, back to the list, going through all these lists. Now, you do everything. If you're a good little girl, like I was the very first time, I did everything. I did what they told me. I got sunlight. I did exercise. I ate properly. The sleep one, because you're supposed to have a sleep routine and you're supposed to go to bed at the same time at night and wake up at the same time the next day. That one I was never able to follow because the depression just wouldn't allow me. I can pull that off. I could pull that off reasonably well when I wasn't having an episode. I now struggle with that due to the menopause, but that's, again, a whole other different issue. And let's not start talking about depression and menopause, and we'll be here all day. So, back to. So, the sleep one, I could never follow. Just couldn't. My brain's not doing it. So, you do all the things, and then you go back for your follow-up meeting. And you see them. Oh, so you're not feeling better then. Instantly, you feel like, well, shit, obviously I didn't do it right. I did something wrong, because this is what works, and if I don't feel better, then I've done it wrong. Now, when you have depression, you're trying to manage depression, and then you're put into a situation where you're made to feel that you're doing something wrong. That's going to make you feel better? Of course it doesn't. It makes you feel heap worse. And I believe, again, prove me wrong if you can. I'm more than happy to be proved wrong. But I don't believe that there are very many, if any, people out there who do all those things that they tell you and become well just like that. Not possible. If it is, then they've misdiagnosed you to start with. Okay. So I don't believe, as I've mentioned, don't believe that recovery is possible. I don't believe it's realistic. I don't believe it's a model that makes sense, and I don't believe it's a model that caters to individual people. Just like with any condition, okay, there's always going to be symptoms that are the same. There's always going to be similarities between people that have a certain condition. But there's also going to be a shit ton of a shit ton of differences. There's always going to be those because people manage things differently. People think differently. People's biological and psychiatric makeup are different. You can't take one solution and apply that to everybody in the world and expect it to work for everybody. It's just not logical. It's just not. So where does that leave the medical profession? Well, I have many suggestions about how the medical profession could improve their models and their behaviour and their treatments, but the biggest thing that needs to change is they need to be open to alternatives. You need to have, and they will tell you nowadays, because it is politically correct, they will tell you that they provide a holistic service. They fucking don't. You go into your psychiatrist and say, well, look, I want to come off my medication and try some lavender essential oil instead. He's going to throw a fit. Okay? They're not holistic at all. They're getting there, kind of. What their meaning of holistic is, okay, so if we get the brain sorted and we can get the body sorted and we can do that. So really all they've done is rephrased their original model. Exercise, eat well, think positively. Is there ever been a more useless statement, more useless suggestion than think positively for people with depression? It's mind-blowingly stupid. So that's what the medical system's done. They've just rearranged and put holistic on it. To my mind, holistic therapy is one that involves everything that can help. And I firmly believe that that's what it helps. There's no one thing that's going to fix depression. There's nothing that's going to fix depression for starters, but there's no one thing that's going to help depression. There's several things. So holistic treatment, holistic therapies include, for me, things like essential oils, shadow work, dream analysis and interpretation, colour therapy, that's a good one, funny enough from somebody who always wears black, but then look at the hair and makeup. What else we got? We've got Reiki, spirituality is another aspect, and that can be a pretty touchy one for many people, but it's becoming more and more common as well as people go back. And I'm talking spirituality. For some people that means religion, for many it doesn't. For some people it means sitting in your garden, being with nature. Okay, so there's all those kind of things. What else have we got? Holistic therapies, crystal therapies. There's a ton of other things, just natural alternatives. I remember in particular one, for years I was on and off antidepressants. I'd take them, get well, come off them, be alright, then be ill again, start the whole thing over and over again. And I remember at least probably only once, as I started to feel myself going down, I immediately went out and got some St. John's wort. Didn't help me. After saying that, I know somebody that it did help. Probably because my brain chemicals are slightly different from hers. Not because her depression was any less or more than mine, but because it was different. Okay? So there's all these other things that you can try, and when our medical system actually cottons onto that and starts giving you a prescription for things like St. John's wort, then they can call themselves holistic. Until then, they're just rewording their whole system, their whole model, and still not getting it right. So, I'll leave it at that, I think, for today. Just, to summarise, those are my three top reasons for why I believe that recovery from depression is bullshit. I believe it sets you up for failure. The very words do. I believe it's unrealistic. I think once you've had an episode of depression, the very odds, the chances of you getting another episode rise, simply because that's how it works. Okay? So it makes more sense, in my opinion, to prepare. Preparing doesn't mean you're bringing it on. It really doesn't. You can't bring on depression. You can bring on certain behaviours that may lead you to an episode of depression. But I don't believe that in itself preparing or half expecting an episode of depression will bring it on. I don't believe that. And also, I feel that you need to be aware of it. When you have your cold and then you recover from it, you don't spend your life in fear of getting another cold. But you also, most of us anyway, also don't go out running around in bare feet in the rain. Because you know that that's really not quite clever, and it could lead to an episode of depression. Oh, sorry, cold. See, I'm getting confused now. So that's my thoughts on recovery from depression. Now, absolutely, if you can prove me wrong on any of the points that I've made, please let me know. Let's have a discussion about this. Okay? If you have any more questions about anything I've spoken about, any comments, please just stick them in the comment place, the comments below. Feel free to DM me, but if you are going to DM me, you need to make it clear that you're not a spammer. So if you are going to DM me from anything about my videos, DM me and make the first word orchid. Okay? Orchid. That way I'll know that you've actually watched a video and you've got something important that you want to talk about, rather than you just, Going to tell me I'm pretty. Although you could do that too as well if you like. Okay. So if you'd like to know some more about the stuff that I'm talking about and how to manage it, I mean, I've talked a lot about why the recovery model is bullshit, but I also have some ideas and some actual processes that will tell you how to deal with it, to give you an alternative ways to deal with your depression. After saying that, that doesn't mean you have to completely wipe out the medical stuff as well. I mean, as I think I've mentioned before, I take antidepressant medication. I really can't see a time when I'm not taking antidepressant medication. It may come, but yeah, I'm not counting any chickens. I have got it reduced to a minimum at the moment. It's not to say it won't go back up again, because if I feel it needs to go back up again, it'll go back up again. But I've had enough experience at this of my own depression to know when that needs to happen. So I'm not excluding the medical advice. Yeah, I am excluding some of it. I am excluding something. Like, think positively. That's stupid. It's just stupid. So I am completely rejecting that part. But you see what I'm getting at. Pick and choose what works for you. Now, to do that, you need to know how. Okay, it's mostly trial and error, I'm afraid. There doesn't really seem to be any way around that. But if you want to know more about that, if you want to know more about some of the alternatives, things like terror therapy, the shadow work, the dream works that we've talked about, send me a DM, and I'll send you a free copy of my book, Depression Sucks, which will tell you a little bit more about that. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the course I'm about to launch called Black Orchid Alchemy. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that, later on when it's a little bit, when I've got a bit more time, to be honest. But feel free to ask. Okay? So that's me for today. Go out, enjoy yourself, have a good day, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.